What you are about to witness is a fascinating interview with a gentleman called Christopher Spencer, or rather that is his pen name. He has to conceal his real name. In the following interview, Christopher speaks about his 50 plus years in the world of high-level finance, both as a banker and a finance and investment broker. He covers everything from international espionage to covert financial agreements, conmen, murder, war, and more, with a touch of personal flair. Everything you are about to hear is true. Some questions were pre-agreed and scripted to explain specific content in his books. Most are not. You can find details of where to buy his books in the video description below. This is part 4. Your second story starts with the scene of a hair-raising nighttime execution, but there is much more to this true story about money laundering, secret bank accounts, sudden death and fraud on a massive scale. It took place in the 1970s. Can you tell me more about these times, please? What were the surrounding circumstances back then?
Well, I was then working in the city, and I was working in the international bond market, and I was given a part of Europe to visit and try and market the international bonds that I was dealing in. So the story came about as a result of that. In those days, Europe was very different. They didn't have the euro. There were weak currencies like the French franc and the Italian lira. There were strong currencies like the German Deutschmark and the Dutch guilder. And money flowed from the weak currency areas into the strong currency areas. That was virtually money laundering. It crossed the country boundaries, the country frontiers. And it was much more prevalent even than it was today. Today we think of money laundering of very rich people, oligarchs, etc., are hiding their money away. In those days, the middle classes were hiding their money away. So the German dentist would transfer his excess money to Switzerland. The Italian engineer would take his excess lira across the border into Switzerland. As a result of this, and because there were bank accounts that you could open up not only in Switzerland but in other countries which were numbered accounts, a lot of money was hidden away from the taxman in these various countries. And that, of course, bred fraud. It bred money laundering. It bred all the bad things that we see these days, and you have major conspiracy, and you have major revelations happening about this and that oligarch having billions in deposit in the British Virgin Islands. That didn't happen in those days because people really didn't know about this. Only those in the know knew about it, but they took benefit of it. And it was a secret and mysterious flow that happened. Only now do we talk about it.
Okay, question 8. Your third true story is called Whispers, and it opens in an ancient fortress with a whispered comment in a foreign language. The point is that the British intelligence agencies wanted to try and find out what he actually meant by his comment. How did you get involved in this puzzle, and how did your wife help?
Well, I was working for an international construction group at the time, and one of my colleagues had, I think, an affiliation with the Secret Intelligence Service. Most people call it MI6. And he knew that my wife spoke this particular language. So he asked me whether I could ask her to try and translate it. And she managed to do that. It was, in fact, in a regional accent of that particular language, and it was slang. But she managed in the last analysis to be able to translate it and to get at its meaning. And that was important because that answer was relayed through to the top level of government. And as a result of that, certain decisions were made and a policy was made to change the course, and indeed it changed the course of history.
I feel like you can elaborate a little bit more without spoiling the story.
All right, I'll elaborate. I'll tell you that the language was Russian. My wife speaks fluent Russian. She managed to break down the phrase that was used because it wasn't a regional accent. We were fed some more information about where the gentleman who said it came from. She identified it as a regional accent. Then she identified it as slang because it made no sense. And she translated what the slang said and then understood what actually the man meant in the context of where and when this phrase was spoken.
You say it changed the course of history. In what way would that have affected the average person without them ever even knowing it happened?
Because as a result of that, the Cold War came to an end. I mean, the Cold War came to an end because of various things. One was the pressure that the Reagan administration put on the Russian government at the time, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics government at the time. But other things came about which persuaded the communist leaders in Russia that the game was up, if you like. Why the phrase was so important, it showed truly that the Russians had made this particular decision to end the Cold War and to change themselves. That's all I can say. You have to read the story to understand how that happened. You know, I tell you, I actually know the man. Well, one of my stories I'm writing at the moment is set in Prague, and it's about communist times in Prague. Because you know my wife is Czech. I don't know if you knew that. I think I told you. And so we used to go back in the bad towns and we went to the new town. And then I carried out a personal favor for the American who is credited by ending the Cold War, who was reporting direct to Reagan.
Is that going in, or do you want
No. That's the latest story. It'll be the next volume.
Okay. Can you tell me much about that, the location of that event? Maybe not specifics, but a lot of the important events you've been a part of and a lot of the important events that have been part of your career have taken place in fascinating locations, the kind of places the average person doesn't even know exist. You told me about one party in Whitehall, underground, for example, somewhere, which I won't mention now because I don't know whether you should discuss it. But yeah, can you just kind of...
Yeah, I mean, locations are important. I've been in a number of fascinating situations in interesting places. I've traveled the world. I've enjoyed, I suppose, this traveling. But, you know, when you travel on business, you don't have time for tourism. You're working literally from a working breakfast to meetings, to a working lunch, to meetings, to a working dinner. You very rarely have time, except when you're asleep, to be by yourself, because it's condensed into, work is condensed into a limited time period. And I had to travel, I had to work out there, but I also had an office back home in London where things were happening. And once I flew back, I used to find a great accumulation of work that I had to do. I suppose one of the most interesting locations that I did visit was in London. Normally people don't get there, but I was working at the time for a particular ministry. And deep below the building of that ministry, there is a wine cellar, which belonged to Henry VIII. It's the remains of the old Whitehall Palace, which was the home for the British monarchs for many hundreds of years. I won't mention the building, but those in the know will know where I'm talking about. But you descended deep and deeper and deeper into this building, past basements and other areas, which we won't talk about. And then you reach this amazing room, amazing huge room. And in the middle of this room was this red brick Tudor building, Tudor wine cellar. And that's where we used to have some interesting parties and where we used to entertain sometimes leading politicians and officials from overseas countries.
And that's beneath people's feet who are going to where.
Yes, people aren't aware that even exists.
Interesting. What's been your favourite place?
I think there's a couple of favourite places that I visited. I was doing some business in Greece, and the gentleman I was working with took me to a lovely restaurant overlooking the Parthenon, and we had lunch there. He was a very educated man. He talked about ancient Greece and the system of democracy worked there. That was quite a memorable experience, memorable experience. I also travelled to Southeast Asia quite a lot. I spent some time travelling to Indonesia, and in fact, in some ways, Jakarta became my second home. There's also two cities that I always felt were very similar. And I used to say that they gave a buzz to you, and you felt when you were in those cities that everything was possible. One was New York, which I visited both on holiday and on business quite a few times. The other one was the old Hong Kong. I can't speak for it now, but when the old Hong Kong was part of was a British colony, the buzz that you got when you were there was very similar to the buzz that you got in New York. Too many high buildings, I suppose, but also the determination that everything could happen, everything was possible.